About to remove the intake manifold. I've already removed the air filter box. I've already got the wiring harness out of the way. Gotten this clip disconnected from this. This has already been unbolted from the top of the thermostat housing and the side of the manifold here. I've already got a couple of bolts from the water pump. I've got the belts off. I've removed the air compressor, or the compressor for the air conditioner. So the next step, according to the documentation, is the idle speed motor. I'm going to be removing this. It's got two bolts holding it on to the intake manifold. I've got one here and one in the back. That'll remove the bracket holding it. So let's get started. After I loosened this clamp, the idle speed motor came off of that. The other pipe came off of the cold start valve. So I'm going to disconnect the connection. I know my cold start valve is backwards for some reason. That was how it was when I bought the car. So that's got that connection loose. Now we're going to remove the W pipe. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 bolts for that. It's an 11mm socket. So we'll take those off. Wiring harness is loose. So we'll take those 5 off and then pull that. Have the W pipe off. There's 2 O-rings there and 2 gaskets there. They all came off clean. I've removed all the fuel lines. This back connector was an 18mm, not a 17. This one on the side that had the 2 banjos was a 19. So I've removed the cables off of the micro switch here. The green and black was on the top, the black was on the bottom. They connected back here. So now we've got to remove this vacuum line from underneath here. Pull this vacuum line off, and then we'll remove these 2 screws here, and that should lift that out. This vacuum switch here was on the back. Had to disconnect the lines. So there was electrical connection and then 2 vacuum lines. This one on the inside, according to the diagram, went to the distributor. So this orange one back here goes on the first one, and then this one goes in the middle one, and then that's the electrical connection. Next, I'm going to remove the cold start valve, loosen the 2 screws holding the vacuum lines on, and remove the bolt holding the cold start valve to the intake manifold, which is right there. So looks like that's a 10mm socket, so we'll get that out. Next, we remove the vacuum line off the back here, remove this ground wire, and disconnect this hose here off the manifold. Okay, I've got those disconnected. I've cable tied everything kind of to the back, got the wiring harness out of the way, got it out of the way, so everything's off. I'll put some of the screws back in so I don't lose them, so I know where they go. So next is to remove the intake manifold. There's 4 bolts holding it on. As you see, there's 1, 2, 3, 4. We're going to use an 11mm socket to take those off. I had this little plate over here. Vacuum, or the spark plug wires were clipped into it, and then this connection here looks like a ground going right here into this connector. Remove that. Got the fuel lines out of the way. I already took this off earlier. Looks like everything's clear, so we should be able to, nope, I got another line back here to take off, so let's get that loose. Okay, have the intake manifold off. I've got rags in the cylinder holes so we don't drop anything down the engine. Everything looks pretty good. I've got trash down in here for sure, but I believe this has been removed before because there is some gasket material. So work's been done on this previously. Looks like I can now get to my pipes. I shouldn't have to take off anything else. I want to try to clean up underneath here, so I may end up removing this, but I'll just wait and see. Remove the Y pipe. I had to remove this bolt to get the copper pipe loose, and it was rusted in there pretty bad. So I encourage you to get some penetrating oil and be patient. Spray it on there, tap on it, try to loosen it a little bit and then tighten it back up, just work it back and forth. I let that sit for a couple of days before I finally got it loose, a little bit at a time. Unlike this nut at the water pump, or this bolt at the water pump broke off, and I was able to get a small bolt from behind and actually go through the threads behind, and ended up pushing out some of the broken threads after we drilled through it, almost the size of the bolt, right in the middle. It was difficult with the muffler in the way, but some of the threads up front are boogered up a little bit, but I've run a bolt through it and it seems to hold okay. So to get the Y pipe out, we got to remove this electrical connection, and then these vacuum lines here. Continuing with the hose replacement, we've got the heater hoses that we're doing. So I've got this bottom heater hose removed from the copper pipe that came through here. This T1 hose goes into the engine here. Then the other feeds the heater. This one comes back, and on top of the T, this hose comes up and over and connects into here. So once we remove this hose, this small hose, replace the ones coming from the pipes, that should be the rest of the heater hoses. Got the new heater hoses on. So we have this hose coming from the bottom that will go into the copper pipe. We've got the other hose coming from the bottom, comes around here, comes into the heater control valve. Gonna have to rotate that up a bit. Little short pipe to the T, back to the engine, and then this tees off and comes up here. So, and for the distributor, previously it looked like the cylinders were 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Now it's time to clean the valley. So I used a little bit of Dawn detergent and poured some hot water in there. Now I've got a drill with a little brass brush on it, and I'm going to go down in the holes and scrub around. I got a couple of wheel brushes I'm going to put on here and just kind of lightly scrape it and let it sit. Vacuum that all out and do that a couple of times, and we'll see what it looks like. Got the valley cleaned up pretty good. Used a couple of treatments of Dawn and hot water and a wire brush and a Dremel tool with a wire brush in it. Got, you know, deep down in the holes. It looks pretty good. I might try to do one more run of it before I paint it. Now I'm working on getting the new refrigeration hoses put in. I ordered these from DeLorean Performance Industries. They come with a hose and the connectors not on them. Using the tool to crimp the ends. So ran this one to the front, and gonna start working on another hose, which is a little small one that goes from the evaporator to the condenser. So put a little refrigerant oil on these to lube them up, and you got these connectors. Quite easy. You just slip this in here. Once the hose is on, put these clamps right there in the spacers. Use the tool, smash the clamp, good to go. So let's get this hose. I've got a new vacuum line kit. So let's get the kit. New vacuum hose kit. So we're going to put that on. So according to this diagram here, and we're going to start with the can in here. So open it up, get these lines loose, and start changing them out. I've got the new AC lines run and crimped down. I've got the new vacuum hoses all connected. That one goes back there, this one here, one that goes right here to here, this one back here to a T. T's off, come down here. This one that's going up there. Alright, I'm going to replace the distributor cap and the rotor. So while you're here, you might as well do the things you can while you're here. Then we'll replace the spark plugs, the spark plug wires, and the fuel lines. Painted the Valley of Death with what was recommended by fellow enthusiasts, this Gliptol red enamel. Did 2 coats of that overnight between coats. Installed these new pieces here. Got these from DeLorean Performance Industries. He recommended some Halomar AF between around the gasket. So basically on each metal piece, put the gasket on, then put these on. That's the blue you're seeing coming out around it. These were torqued to 9.5 foot-pounds. They are an 11mm socket. The Y pipe just has O-rings. This new pipe here got it connected to the water line back there. The hose was a lot smaller than the pipe, so it took a little bit of trying to get that on there. Got it a little bit wet. That helped it go in there a little better. But again, O-rings underneath here, new bolts, torqued to 9.5 foot-pounds on the Y pipe. Did not worry about replacing these. They seem to be okay. So that's where we are right now. So going to start with the fuel lines, new fuel filter, do a little bit more cleaning up, and we'll see what's next. I'm going to replace the fuel lines. This is a 12mm wrench and 12mm socket. We'll take that off and then clean up the bolt. So first let's take this off and see what it looks like. There's the bolt and the 2 copper washers. I'm going to run a little bit of wire brush on the drill on this and just kind of lightly scuff it, get some of the deposits off. Got new copper washers to put on and a new fuel line, so let me clean up the bolt. Alright, the bolt's all clean. It's a little pitted, but I've got a good surface. No little rust spots or no little bumps or something where the washers or the copper seals are going to sit. So we'll get these rest of them cleaned up and then get them back on the fuel distributor. Okay, I popped the clip off and got the injector out, the little rubber piece here. Got a new clip, a new rubber piece. Cleaned the bolt up for the injector. Cleaned it up a little bit with the wire brush. Do a little bit better, but now let's reassemble. The clip and the rubber piece on. Have my new copper washers on the bolt and the fuel line. Screw that in. Torque it down to between 7 and 9 foot-pounds, and we're done. After the water pump was mounted, I put this self-bleeder kit on that I got a while back. So I'm hoping that will help when I go to bleed the system once I get coolant in it. You can turn this to open it up. Now, part of me wants this to be back here, but this is the way they show putting it on. So we'll let that go and see how it works once we get everything together. After connecting all of the coolant lines, pressure tested this with a pressure test I got off Amazon. It wasn't all that great. The pump leaked a little bit, but at least it let me find a couple of leaks I had, and it was holding pressure at 15 psi. Pretty steady. It was dropping slightly, but I put the pump in some water and the pump was leaking, so I'll probably have to rent one from AutoZone to make sure. But I did not get any leaks at all when I went up to close to 20 psi. Didn't get any leaks in the valley, so I felt comfortable, could put the intake manifold back on. So got the new rubber seals for the intake, got the new bolts, torqued those down to about 8.5 foot-pounds. I think the range is 7 to 11. It was 11mm to put those 4 back on. Swapped out the vacuum lines with blue, just easy to identify. I kind of like the look of them. Everything was labeled from DeLorean to go. Been trying to tighten up my fuel line, this one back here and the one from the fuel filter. I believe I got those pretty snug. That's about it. Next I will get the vacuum lines hooked up to where they're supposed to go back here, and then try to get the fuel distributor mounted. I'll have to get the cold start valve mounted. So going fairly well. Got the cold start valve in. The pipe basically goes straight and connects in the middle of the intake manifold with one bolt going in it. Tighten that down pretty snug, pretty easy. Had to move it ever so slightly to get this pipe connected back here. Wasn't lined up, so this will actually turn a little bit to get it in place before you put this back on and tighten it. So just make sure this is exactly where it needs to be. It can kind of move a little bit, so otherwise you won't be able to get this on correctly. After getting this attached to the intake manifold, we got to get what they call the pipe of agony connected back in. Having the black elbow hose on the pipe didn't work out for me while I was putting it in, so I took it out and then was able to just find a spot in here. If you do this before the fuel lines are really connected, it's a lot easier to get to. You can pull these all out of the way, and you just kind of put your head up in here and find a slot and basically just push it right back up in there. I wet the end of the copper pipe a little bit and it slid right in just fine, and then rotated it around and put the elbow back on, connected it back in before I got all this tightened up. Alright, we got the fuel distributor in and got the W pipe back on. Used the Halomar AF around the gaskets. Got these tight but not torqued yet. Have to look up the torque specifications on those. Got the electrical connections hooked back in here. Got the vacuum line coming in and hooked underneath there. Hard to see with everything in the way. There we go. There. Got all these vacuum lines on, the cold start valve. Routing the fuel lines and distributor wires over here was pretty easy. Over here I kept flipping them back and forth trying to find the best route, and got them all tucked in back in here. Now I'm got to get the fuel lines hooked up to the fuel distributor, and initially when I put this in, this banjo end was in the wrong orientation and I could not turn the thing. I was kind of hesitant to turn it because it felt like I was going to break. So someone told me that they do turn, so I got a screwdriver and some vice grips and clamped down, not terribly hard but pretty good right here, and then was able to stick the screwdriver in here and pivot this to the right orientation. So I got them all exactly kind of where they need to be. Printed out this diagram here to help me with what goes where, and then found this one that shows just kind of how they're routed, just to see if I wanted to come through here or around the back. And looks like, you know, they've got them around the back for the coming from the fuel filter and the warm-up regulator. So I've got them all oriented correctly. From the frequency valve, that'll go here, back to the, let's see, those two will go on, this will go back here, that's oriented there. Might need to turn that one a little bit more, but pretty much everything's in place. So gonna hook those up, clean the banjo bolts up, use brand new copper. They're not really washers, they're going to be seals to prevent leaks. And once I get that hooked up, just kind of double check everything, torque wise, check these bolts, go through, check the fuel lines, make sure they're all tight, and then we'll put some gas in it, get the belt hooked back up to the alternator. Not going to worry about the air conditioner right now. I figured I would get it started, making sure everything's running, and then we'll go back and revisit the air conditioner and get that finished up. So let's get started. Okay, got all the fuel lines connected. Nothing's tight yet, just left them a little loose so I could make sure everything fits on there good. Decided to route this one kind of underneath and back around. The one coming off the fuel filter, I kind of snaked it around here. It seems to work okay going this route. It seems almost like it's a little longer than it should be. A little bit crowded here where the transmission check is, but nah. I'll probably cable tie these up in various places to keep them out of the way, keep them from rubbing things. So now we just got to torque everything down. That should be it. Got everything connected in the car, and I've put about 6 gallons of gas in the tank. I had removed my tank earlier and cleaned it out, so I had to take the fuel pump out, and I just kind of checked it, make sure it was okay. Put the fuel pump back in, put the gas in. To get the lines kind of pressurized, this is the RPM relay. So if you disconnect this, I have noted with a Sharpie which 2 connectors need to be jumpered. And if you take a jumper and hook in to these 2 connections here, it will start the fuel pump, and the fuel pump can run. And what I ended up doing was pulled this injector loose right here, and I have a spice jar that I use. You can get these pretty much anywhere, but I drilled a hole in the top the same size as the little rubber bushing and put my injector in here and basically let it rest here. And I did that on all 6 of them earlier just to get the spray pattern, but once the fuel pump's running, you can press this down to open up the fuel injectors, and you can check your spray pattern, and that will also kind of make sure you got fuel all the way to your injectors to get the air out of the lines. And once I had that, they were all spraying good. I put them all back in, and we'll fire it up. Okay, I've confirmed everything's torqued down, everything's connected and tight. Got no leaks from any of these when the RPM relay was jumpered and the fuel pump was running. Got good spray patterns on all of my injectors, so now we're ready to fire up the car. All right, here we go, starting the car. Try that again. Give it a little bit of gas and fire it up.